I'd never met LaMonica before we started on this show, and I think we connected right off the top.
It all started at a charity gala in Austin, one of those laid-back boots and bourbon type of evenings where the stars gather to pretend they aren't stars, at least for a few hours. Sam Elliott had been invited to present a Lifetime Achievement Award to a fellow Western film legend, and it should have been a quiet night. You know, a nod to tradition, a few whiskey-soaked speeches, and a polite ride into the Texas sunset. But what happened instead sent a ripple straight through Hollywood like a six-shooter blast through a saloon door. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Sam Elliott, gravel-voiced icon of American masculinity, silver mustache like a badge of honor, stepped up to the microphone and did what no one expected. He named names, 5 of them, 5 actors, fellow professionals, whom he openly said he couldn't stand. No jokes, no wink, no charming little, I'm just messing with you. Straight up honesty. A rarity in the industry, and coming from a man so revered for his code of silence and cowboy mystique, it was like watching a cathedral suddenly erupt into flame. He wasn't goaded into it either. He wasn't drunk nor performing. He was just done being quiet. Elliot had always maintained a certain image. The stoic old guard, the voice behind the Big Lebowski's Nameless Stranger, the weathered cowboy from Tombstone, the seasoned mentor in A Star is Born. He didn't throw punches. He didn't play Twitter wars. But that night, with his low, deliberate drawl echoing through the room, he changed the temperature instantly. You could feel it in the air. The kind of cold hush that descends when something real happens in a world of pretense. The first name out of his mouth, Timothy Chalamet. You could hear the oxygen being sucked from the room. Chalamet, the indie darling turned blockbuster leading man, wasn't exactly the type of actor you'd expect to land in Elliot's crosshairs. But Elliot didn't hold back. He called him out, not for any personal transgression, but for what he represented, a kind of new Hollywood softness that, in Elliot's view, diluted the grit and substance that made acting something you earned rather than curated. People whispered. Some laughed, thinking it was some sort of surreal bit, but Elliot kept going. The next name, Jared Leto. Now this one seemed less surprising. Leto's method acting, his sometimes unhinged immersion into characters like Joker and Suicide Squad, had drawn controversy before, but Elliot's issue wasn't about performance. It was about ego, about self-importance, about what he saw as theater kids cosplaying danger, turning acting into a narcissistic spectacle rather than a craft of restraint and truth. And then came the third, Ezra Miller. That landed with a harder thud. By then, Miller had already been involved in a slew of public incidents, erratic behavior, allegations, a general cloud of chaos trailing them like a shadow. But still, this wasn't a TMZ snippet. This was Sam Elliott, a man whose moral compass was practically carved into wood, saying the quiet part loud. And it wasn't about gossip, it was about values. How certain behaviors, when tolerated for too long, start corroding the integrity of an entire art form. The fourth name was almost too much to believe, Nicolas Cage. Now here was a twist. Cage, the internet's eccentric uncle, the Oscar-winning wild card who'd spent decades ricocheting between brilliance and absurdity, seemed an odd pick. But Elliot didn't mince words. He referenced the idea of performance as spectacle again, talked about how Cage once stood for something solid and meaningful, leaving Las Vegas, adaptation, even raising Arizona, but had devolved in Elliot's eyes into a carnival. He didn't hate the man, he clarified. He hated what he had let himself become. And then the final name? Pete Davidson. Not even an actor in the traditional sense, though he's starred in films like The King of Staten Island and played in Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Davidson's presence on the list was, in some ways, the most telling. Elliot saw him not as a villain, but as a symptom of a culture that blurs the line between performance and persona, that trades in emotional authenticity for ironic detachment and relatability. To Elliot, that was the antithesis of storytelling. That was surrender. So there they were. 5 names. 5 arrows shot clean through the heart of modern Hollywood. And it wasn't rage. It wasn't ranting. It was the cold, calm voice of a man who'd spent decades watching the town change under his boots and had finally decided to say something about it. What followed wasn't a storm of insults or tweets or counter-cancellations. Not yet, anyway. That moment at the mic stood alone, like a black and white photograph dropped into a neon-lit room. and the implications stretched beyond mere celebrity gossip. Elliot had cut into something deeper, something that had been quietly brewing under the surface of the industry for years. It brought into focus the widening rift between the old guard and the new wave, the classic ideal of an actor as someone who disappears into roles, who builds a career brick by brick with discipline and integrity, versus the modern notion of celebrity, where brand often overshadows craft. Elliot's speech wasn't just about the 5 men he named. It was a referendum on what acting is anymore, or what it's allowed to be. There's always been tension between generations in Hollywood. Think of Marlon Brando spitting contempt at John Wayne, or the Brat Pack being mocked by Laurence Olivier. But rarely had it been laid out so starkly by someone still straddling the line. Someone who had worked with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper and could still look back and say, "No, we're losing something." The setting of the gala gave it an extra layer of irony. It was meant to celebrate legacy, to honor longevity, to pay homage to those who had held the line against the onslaught of change. And Elliot, in his own way, did just that. He protected something he believed in, even if it meant lighting a few bridges on fire. What made the moment even more potent was the absence of malice. He wasn't mean. He wasn't vindictive. He didn't call for anyone's career to end. He just spoke plainly. And that might have been what made it so jarring. In an industry addicted to euphemism, where every feud is buried under layers of press release diplomacy, hearing someone actually say what they think felt like a slap. And maybe that's why the shockwaves carried so far, because it wasn't just about actors, it was about what gets rewarded in culture. About how audiences are complicit, often applauding performances that are loud rather than layered, personalities that dominate rather than serve. Elliot's message wasn't just to his peers, it was to us. There was something deeply American about it all. The cowboy finally pulling off the gloves, not to fight, but to reveal the scars underneath. It wasn't nostalgia, it wasn't grumpiness. It was mourning. Mourning for a kind of professionalism, a kind of humility that he saw vanishing. And for every person who dismissed the moment as bitter or out of touch, there were others who felt a strange sense of relief. Relief that someone had said what they'd been thinking but were too scared to articulate. That maybe, just maybe, there was still space in this landscape for truth spoken without spin. Elliot didn't name actors known for failure or irrelevance. He named sacred cows. He kicked at the pillars. He named guys who win awards, sell tickets, own memes, and headline major franchises. That's what made it daring. He didn't go for the easy targets. He went for the ones that symbolized something larger, an ethos, an aesthetic, a shift. And that's why the night stayed lodged in the collective memory like a bullet in a whiskey barrel. Because Sam Elliott didn't just talk about actors he hated. He laid bare his belief that something sacred had been traded away. That the mystique of the performer, the nobility of the work, had been replaced by noise. And he didn't care if it made him look like the last gunslinger out of step with the times. Maybe that was the point. He wasn't calling for revolution. He was making a record, saying, in essence, I was here. I saw the change, and I refused to pretend it was progress. And somehow that made it even more powerful. The aftermath hadn't even begun, yet the room itself seemed altered, as if time had folded inward the moment Sam Elliott finished speaking. Eyes didn't just follow him as he stepped down from the podium, they lingered. Conversations paused, drinks were left untouched, and for once, actors known for rehearsed expressions looked genuinely stunned. Not by outrage, but by the sheer audacity of unfiltered honesty. It was as though someone had torn away the velvet curtain and exposed the gears behind the glamour, the contradictions everyone had silently agreed not to mention. And Elliot, ever the outsider who somehow remained inside, had broken the pact. In an industry defined by diplomacy and back-channel politics, where criticism is often cloaked in sarcasm or thinly veiled metaphor, his clarity landed like thunder in a vacuum. No spin, no strategic phrasing. Just a man who'd seen too much and decided silence was no longer strength. The actors seated in the audience, especially those not named, sat a little stiffer in their chairs, suddenly questioning what Elliot might have said if he had 5 more names to give. Because that was the thing. He wasn't just condemning personalities, he was issuing a warning. and warnings from cowboys tend to echo. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Sam Elliott naming 5 actors he hates publicly now? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.